One? Okay. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel, which focuses on one of the stickiest points affecting blockchain mass adoption, data sharing and making decentralization acceptable. My name is Artiona Bogo. I'm part of SAP's core blockchain team, and I drive blockchain business development activities for SAP customers. So we often say blockchain is a team sport, but in an enterprise setting, where competitive organizations are actually supposed to join a shared network, they are quite actually wary of doing that because, of course, they don't want to expose their data to their competitors. So when they do so, when they actually decide to join, sometimes also because of peer pressure, because of fear of staying behind and so on. But even if they do join, most of the scenarios revolve around target architectures which employ hashed data structures that revolve around proof of state, proof of existence, proof of history use cases, which, yes, can give a lot of efficiency gain to organizations, but they are not truly the revolutionizing cross-company collaborations. So to discuss this and more, I'm very pleased to introduce my impressive fellow panelists. So from to my right, Alex Yakovlev. Alex is the head of the blockchain lab at Moscow Exchange and also the co-founder of Hyperledger, the global ecosystem for safekeeping, settlements, and servicing of digital assets. Alex brings 15 years of experience in the IT industry and is the architect behind several deployments that involve Fabric and Iroha. Welcome, Alex. To his right, Dimitri. Dimitri Barinov is the CTO of SecureKey. Dimitri also brings 18 years of experience in IT and security. SecureKey is the company that aims at building trusted identity networks, and it's an identity and authentication provider. Jesse from Monetago, he's quite famous here around, like being chased from journalists. Jesse is a tech entrepreneur, startup investors that has a lot of successful exits under his arm. Brings a lot of experience in the industry, founded Monetago in 2014, and as we heard it from Brian earlier this morning, Monetago earlier this year deployed its fraud mitigation network in India, which is one of the first blockchain networks to be used in day-to-day operations anywhere in the world, focusing on financial services, on the financial services industry. And last but not least, Aleš Živković. Aleš is the CTO of Soramitsu Labs and also a part-time instructor in Penn University. For those of you that don't know Soramitsu Labs, they are actually the first contributors behind the Iroha project in Hyperledger. Aleš is also bringing 20 years of IT experience based out of Innopolis, Russia. He is also responsible for contributions to the Iroha project. So to kick this off in a very direct but also kind of personal way, it's end of 2018, right? So what is your most proud contribution towards making decentralization acceptable? 2 minutes each, if possible. You can kick it off.
Okay. Actually, my only contribution is a technology that we have in Hyperledger projects, to be honest. We done a lot of jobs with Fabric. We issued several commercial bonds to real settlements, to real life cycle. We implemented zero-knowledge proofs to Fabric in terms of our e-voting platform for shareholder meetings. And also, we're working a lot with Hyperledger Iroha to adopt it to make a kind of a global account management system instead of local ones. So that's it. Next.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have been working with identity for many years in SecureKey and with identity federations. And we started to look into how we can use the decentralized technologies about 3 years ago. Ended up building very interesting implementation on top of Hyperledger Fabric. And I guess the whole last year, we've been offering some improvements to Fabric that actually came into production versions or general availability versions of Fabric, so which was fantastic. But also we prepared to launch a Canadian identity ecosystem with a lot of industry, public and private players, which is being launched right now. So that was a very big year for us, and always happy to talk obviously about what I did, so I probably should stop.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Artiona. So I guess, unlike these folks, we haven't contributed as much on the code side, but we definitely have been evangelizing DLT and blockchain quite broadly. I actually quite often say that it's not the technology that's the issue, it's really how do you get everyone to the table and provide something that isn't just proof of concept, isn't just a pilot, but that can provide real value today and that they'll pay you for. So when we launched our fraud mitigation network, it was initially for three customers. It basically eliminated duplicate financing of invoices. What we learned was that there was a problem across the entire industry. So we wound up opening up that network to the entire finance industry in India, and then now are replicating that amongst different geographies. So it's a somewhat discrete use case, but I kind of look at it as the foot in the door. Once we've got those network established, then we can start to do other things like run business processes through there, validate things, and sort of hopefully bring the promise that we've all been talking about for a while.
Yes, Soramitsu is a blockchain company, so whatever we do is to some extent contributing to that, but as it was mentioned in the introduction, so we developed initially, then open sourced, and it was adopted by the Hyperledger, the blockchain platform Iroha, which will now reach the first final version in probably end of December, January. That was a huge effort. But we are also using Iroha for our enterprise use cases. One is with the central bank in Cambodia. Another one is together with Alexander on the D3, the centralized digital depository, and also on the KYC digital identity solutions. We're just finishing up the proof of concept in Jakarta with the BCA.
Wonderful. Jesse, so the enterprise audience might be often wondering whether decentralization trade-offs made to preserve, or I'd better say hide, business relationships between partners sitting on the same ledger, whether those trade-offs are still superior to a centralized approach should that ever be agreed among network participants. So how much decentralized do we need to be in permission network? How was it at the fraud mitigation deployment in India? Was it perfect decentralization? Can you share a couple of things?
So the initial participants were 3. So it was pretty easy to get them all to come to the table. Now, as we've started to open the network up to other participants, it's become sort of the question of how many nodes do we need? Do we have agent nodes, or does everybody need a strict node hosted by them? And I actually had a discussion with someone from the UN about sort of the ethical or humanitarian deployment of blockchains, and they were going down the path with Ethereum, and I said, look, you don't necessarily need to have an open public blockchain for this. If, say, the Red Cross and the UN and, say, the NGO that's running the project are all hosting nodes, that's pretty much enough decentralization and distribution of the data.
What about governance? Because straight out of Zug, so not very far away from Basel, I remember the TechCrunch gathering sometime in July. Vlad Zamfir talked about governance, and we're not still there. In Prague very recently at DevCon, it was more or less the same argument. What about permission networks? How, even with 3 participants, how is governance actually structured there? Because if we would perfectly be decentralized, that would also be mirrored in the governance and in rules that, yes, incentivize founding members, but don't discourage others to actually join.
Yeah, because factoring in India is a regulated function, you need to have a certificate of factoring from the Reserve Bank. So that's pretty much the bar for if you're able to join the network. In terms of governance, we did come across the problem that we had initially deployed this for just 3 customers and didn't really anticipate opening it up. So when we did get interest from other people to join the network, we had to go back to the original founding members and sort of say, hey, we're thinking of opening it up. And they sort of said, well, what's in it for us? So we basically cut them in on a rev share for new customers to the point where I don't think it'll ever be a big revenue center for them, but it'll effectively be, because they were the founding members, means that they're going to have pretty much free access at the end of the day.
Yes. Dmitry, so there is an overall sentiment. Applications we have talked about for a very long time, such as KYC, identity, or healthcare, are still not very widely implemented. So can there be any perfect marriage between decentralization and identity, and is that even wanted?
So in my opinion, and in our experiences, it's definitely wanted, and it's definitely can be implemented. And I hate to be a self-promoter, right? But I know of one such implementation. But the interesting part is at some point, and while preparing even for this session, right, looking into some articles where people were saying this, oh, this blockchain, what's the hype, why we're investing money in this for 10 years, where are the real implementations? There are a few very important points. The technology, when it started some time ago, was in its infancy. It's quite honestly still in its infancy. Many of the Hyperledger Fabric projects just either had the first general availability releases or just haven't the first general availability releases. And as with every first general availability release, there would be issues, and maybe large corporate players will be looking into, and large government players will be looking at how fast and how performant and how efficient those networks are. And then when those releases are proven to be stable, the implementation cycle kicks in. And the implementation cycle in all these 3 areas, such as KYC or health and others, it takes time. It takes time for the bank to get to the KYC scenario, no matter what they do. It takes time for the typically the government health regulator to understand what's going on with any health blockchain implementation. And quite honestly, it takes time to integrate it on the API level. So in my opinion, the decentralization architecture is actually getting more and more popular. There are more and more use cases that will be leveraged. There are more and more very interesting technologies that support it. But it still will be taking time. But I'm sure we will see more and more real-life production implementations with millions of users in 2019, 2020, and so on.
I think I like a lot what you're saying, because you're actually making a cause that, yes, we know, everyone knows that blockchain is still in its infancy, but as more and more organizations join this, I would not like to call it hype, but actually become more aware about what blockchain could actually empower for their business, I think it's very important to not to play it real, to tell it like it is, to actually inform this new audience about the possible trade-offs that you actually need to undertake in a new implementation. And actually, oftentimes, from my own personal experience, I see that it's not perfectly decentralized, that you have to build upon what you already have, like, for example, for KYC processes. You will not throw away those onboarding processes that are already in place, but slowly it can go towards that direction. So, and this is like kind of the message I'd like to transmit to the audience or whoever listens to this, because it might be a little bit confusing for new players. Like, there are some companies out there who are very bullish and loyal to this decentralization principle because they have blockchain at heart, but very rarely it actually works like that. So it has like a stage phase where you actually need to start from somewhere.
No, 100% agree. And to add to that, you would, when we're talking about the blockchain, right, it's actually any one of us in this room would be able to name 5 or 6 or 7 flavors of the blockchain, right? It could be permissioned, it could be private, it could be public. There are various methods of consensus. And many of these models could be very much applicable to one implementation or one market and might not be applicable to any other market. For sure, when you want to implement something in the market which has regulations about certain data exchanges, it could be, for example, permissioned and private chain. For sure, if you want to have the anonymous currency, right, it will be something else.
Okay, so my next question goes to Alex. So Alex, the financial services industry is, we know it's characterized by a very complex operations framework, a lot of players, many partners, inaccessible data, lack of information sharing. So yeah, multiple parties interacting with one another that could lead to possible intransparencies, which also lead to fraud. So what is the most significant result of the work you're actually doing at the blockchain lab at Moscow Exchange to actually tackle this?
Actually, you know, Russia is one of sources of fraud, fancy beers and all other stuff that you have known from newspapers. But anyway, from my point of view, results that we have in Moscow Exchange are not so significant because we have results from Nakamoto and Bitcoin blockchain and other blockchains that are still working without any kind of governance. But we also have some forks of these permissionless chains that are trying to work with some kind of directors and fight against permissionless ones by another permissionless. And that is beautiful because it is real value without control. It is new business model. We are trying to work in our enterprises with existing models and business case, and that is our fault, to be honest. Because if we will see blockchain as an existing use case just with applied blockchain, like combination of Jennifer Lopez and aloe vera, you will not know what to do with this combination. Because it is beautiful, it can help somehow, but it is not a business value, to be honest. So we just need to find out new use cases that are impossible to run without blockchain. Then it will be a good case, like to allow millennials to invest by crowdfunding in somehow in something, or to make a kind of transparent law system and transparent decisions by courts made in source code. That will be good, because all our other games are just toys, like small railway model that we are trying to put on small railways and to see how it will go on with just small use case. Even in India, I'm sorry for the words, it is just a small part of business process already in blockchain, but it will work purely if it will be all relationships in the chain that cannot be bothered by sanctions or by something, some other power that can switch it off. Then it will be a brave new world with some beauties that I will vote for.
Everyone agrees to this, or?
Well, you know, so I come at it from the sales or the business side of things. So it's, you have to start somewhere. You know, you have to, like I say, it's great to have a utopian vision, and the end state should be what you're focusing on. But how do you get people to the table today? How do you get them to agree that, you know, that they will run even just one part of their business process through a common blockchain? And I think it's incremental. It's not revolutionary. I think that's the way we're going to see this deployed, at least on the enterprise level. You know, there's a lot of public chains out there that are focused on different problems potentially that they may take off, but trying to get a bank to agree to buy something on a common network isn't as simple as sort of, first of all, you've got the pushback from IT, because they've just maybe spent $1 billion on their core banking system, and to go in and tell them that their baby's ugly is not going to get you a good result. And so, I think you have to build on the platforms. You have to show value at first. You have to show that there is a return on investment, and then you can start to evolve it so that you get to the point where Alex says, where you are actually running almost all of your business processes through there, and it's validated by smart contracts, so that you can eliminate different types of frauds and increase transparency and things like that. So I think it's more of an evolution that will happen, and a lot of it has to be driven by governments in some cases, at least initially, as we start to, I think, really get this tech out into production and deployed.
As Alex was actually speaking, I got reminded of a quote from someone that was sharing a panel with me. He actually is coming from the enterprise space, but he said, "Oh, you want me to be controversial? There is no case for blockchains in the enterprise." Comment on that.
Well, that's a very short-sighted side of things. So I actually come from an IT background, more in technology. I built distributed systems for the last X number of years, worked for one of the largest content delivery networks. And when I started on this path down working with blockchain and what have you, it was originally with Bitcoin. And I was less excited about Bitcoin, was really more excited about the distributed application platform. So I kind of look at blockchain as the first step into really secure, robust distributed application networks, as opposed to necessarily a system for just passing tokens.
The person was definitely not a Bitcoin maximalist or whatsoever. I think it came more from the frustration of this making decentralization acceptable. And this is what I try to actually argue with all of you today. It's hard. And people that work in the enterprise space know it. Like people that are in the blockchain business every day, it's already hard for huge companies to innovate in their silos. Like imagine putting 3, 4, 5, or even more of them dynamically on a single source of truth. So this is what we're trying to actually try to accelerate on this, and how to, what we should be doing better, so to say.
Well, I think you also have someone, if they come from an enterprise software company, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. A lot of the things that we've done, like we just did an integration with Swift, people are like, aren't you guys somewhat at odds with each other? And I said, no, they've got a conduit into thousands of banks around the world. The banks trust them for authentication and encryption and moving their data amongst them. So why throw that out? Why say you've got to do something different? So, it's coming at it with a fresh approach. I don't even have a finance background. I've learned all this in the last 3 or 4 years. Coming at it with a fresh approach, sometimes you see things that someone who's worked in enterprise software forever may not get.
And one of the better arguments and better maybe use cases for proving that decentralization makes sense is actually combining the organizations on the use cases that are well known for them, where they have to communicate, where they do not necessarily trust each other, where they have to have some transaction proofs, where they cannot have single points of trust or single points of failure. And that typically kickstart the process. I'm sure that's probably what kickstarted the process with your fraud use case in India. That's what kickstarted the process in Canada as well.
So what you just described is the perfect situation for transforming cross-company collaborations among partners that actually, yes, do not fully trust one another, but on the other side are known partners to each other. But Alesh, did you have any experience with actually competitors sitting on this single source of truth and then sharing data with one another? Did you have any experience where you, as the technology provider, for example, playing the more neutral role, were trying to convince them that, hey, look, there can be something cool behind sharing data, not just maybe pure hashes, but really content-related data, because that could actually unlock new operating models among all of you?
Yeah, I mean, there are several questions that we need to ask ourselves to answer that question. First of all is, do we have any retailers in the room? Any banks? Okay, at least one. So, you know, about the retailers, do you want to hold the credit card information in your information systems? Do you want to have, you know, the banks, do you want to do the KYC? Is this your core business? You have to do it. So by introducing those new concepts, new solutions, and I'm talking about we have a solution for KYC, zero knowledge proofs, verifiable claims. With these new concepts on the blockchain, we can see a different use and different use cases for all the enterprises. And some of them might like what we will be seeing in the future. Some of them will have to shift a little bit their mindset and build things slightly different. Because now everyone is talking, well, data, information, this is what we need. This is what is important for us. But on the other hand, we see those GDPR and other initiatives that are trying to protect the data. Now, what is happening here is who actually needs certain part of data and for what? And with the blockchain, you can change the name of the game. You can say who controls the data. In our case, what we are building is the user has the data and he's informed and he should approve every exchange of the data. We are building this for the, for different banks that, and insurance companies that are exchanging the data, but they need approval for that, right? From the user, so the data stays with the user. And by saying that, I would like to go a little bit to the technology part. If you are building such solutions, think a little bit what you are putting on the blockchain and what you have to put on the blockchain, because maybe data don't have to be on the blockchain. You just need certain information, certain proof that needs to be on the blockchain. And let me close this by maybe emphasizing, because one of our projects that we are really passionate about is called Sora, and it's a decentralized autonomous organization. So it's about the economy that sets completely different rules, and they're sharing the information, and trust how you share the information, it's completely different. Now, sitting around the table, well, in our example, I don't have a good answer to that, because we are working with the central bank who would say to all 40 banks, please come to the table, and you have to talk with us. This is reality for now.
Which is also fine.
Which is also fine, yes, but I think in the future that will change, and maybe just reflect to what was discussed before. I think the companies need to think what the decentralized means in the essence. It's not a power game, so you cannot come to the table and force something. Maybe you were able to do that before, because if you were doing that, the supplier could not say, well, I will not play the game. But now the things are changing.
But it's harder to actually incentivize suppliers without a proper token mechanics, like for scenarios where it's purely digitization or like proof of state, proof of history, proof of existence, where there is not really like this token mechanics to actually incentivize that. Maybe the only incentivization for suppliers is that they would be using only one, hopefully, portal, that they would not need to go to hundreds of portals for each OEM and stuff like that. So the token, the incentivization mechanism actually needs to be clearly defined for enterprise scenarios as well.
And also we have a problem with interaction between different chains, because you always need to provide proof of existence of something that lies in another chain to your chain. And that is fundamental problem that we are working on a lot in our working groups in Hyperledger, but unfortunately still we have no final answer how to do it.
Okay, wonderful. As I look at the time, and also because I want to give the chance to the audience to ask any question, I have only one final round of questions for all of you. So was thinking, what should we be doing better in 2019? So when Moon for enterprise blockchains? Your 1 or 2 sentence summary?
Actually, there is a chance to the moon. Still, I think that governance of networks and mechanisms to allow networks to be decentralized ledgers will be the challenge for next year, to be honest, in terms of financial industry, in terms of healthcare, and in terms of other areas, because everywhere, if we have a kind of a network, we can apply blockchain, and we just need to calculate, is it economically sensible or not?
Yeah, in my point of view, obviously the governance is very important, but because maybe I'm looking at more applied problems right now, I think that more and more the concentration will be of the work will be associated with actually making the real production platforms out of the blockchain systems that we have, concentrating on stability and performance, ensuring that the blocks are not lost, ensuring that we actually can do transactions in single seconds, ensuring that we can run in various implementations and in various cloud environments. It's very important actually for solving the decentralization problem, because if you are dealing with one partner who believes that everything needs to be hosted in Azure, and another one who believes that everything needs to be hosted at IBM, right now it doesn't work, right? Well, typically. So that's actually what I think would be
so openness and collaboration.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with both of their points. You know, I think when you look at least from my purview of financial services side of things, you know, these are enterprise sales, and the typical life cycle for these things is a couple of years. You know, you don't just go in and sell them a new database tomorrow. There's a procurement, there's auditing, there's all sorts of evaluations, RFPs, blah, blah, blah. And the fact that we've really just started to hit 1.0 with a lot of these things means that, you know, it's a 2-year cycle typically for a lot of these things. So we're still going to see another year of some more pilots, some more POCs. But the things that are encouraging to me are things like central banks and regulators getting a grasp of this. You know, because that's the first question I get from every bank that I talk to, independent of any use case, is, what does the Reserve Bank think of this? What do the regulators think? What does my compliance department think? And, you know, that education has been happening and is going to continue to happen. But that's, you know, I think it's incremental, and we're gonna get there, but maybe you know, halfway to the moon next year.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all that was said. I would just like to add, if you're looking for the problem, you will always find one. So I think with the blockchain, I mean, you can always find a problem, and you can use this as an excuse towards your management board to say, well, it's too early, or it's not for us, or whatever you want to say. But you might be missing a huge opportunity, and taking into consideration, as it was said before, the openness and you know, trying to be ahead of time, trying to do something now, even if it not be in production like next year. I think that's the right approach. If you will be waiting and thinking about all the problems that you have back home, or trying to solve all those problems by implementing something on the blockchain, it will not happen. But on the other hand, those things are happening, and you know, others will do it. And if you want to be part of this great you know, thing called blockchain, you have to move fast. You have to do something today, not wait until like another 5 years or whatever.
Very cool. Thanks to all of you. So we have a couple of more minutes for questions. Like, if there is anyone from the audience who thinks that we missed any important part or has something which is burning. Very cool, yeah. Karin, my friend from Germany. I also have to move around because we don't have any staff support.
Gorgeous. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Karen from Germany, you heard. I'm from university area, and to be honest, I think one problem we have at the moment is that leaders and companies look at blockchain discussion and take it as a little bit techie stuff, they don't understand. And if I remember right, PricewaterhouseCoopers took a study and found out 51% of all those leaders in companies do not even understand blockchain, and because they don't understand, they don't like it, and they don't cope with it. So if we have this situation, it might be good that you go ahead with your projects, but what we need is more clearly understandable storytelling about even about the problems you have, because I think if we don't share, if we don't speak, if we don't discuss, for example, your point with the smart contracts, take a lawyer's view on contracts and how complicated they are in the real world, and it's often so many times mixed up, and sometimes I think even in the IT world it's mixed up, that we could cover everything with smart contracts so far. So there's a lot to do with communication. Would you agree?
I think it's also that if we're trying to sell to business leaders, we shouldn't be selling them a particular flavor of technology. We should be talking about the problem we're solving. So when we first started talking to banks, we'd say, hey, we're a blockchain company, and they'd come and go, great, go talk to our IT department. And now when I go in and say, hey, who runs your trade finance products? Would you like to reduce fraud and receivables financing? They're like, great. And they don't care that it's a blockchain running on the other end of it. So, you know, it's like, do you care that you're using an Oracle database versus a MS SQL database versus an open source one? Not really. It's kind of what's the app that you built on top of it.
Yeah, and actually would agree with, sorry, go ahead. No, I actually would agree with that. And the funny example is, so we're implementing with a number of financial institutions and with a number of government agencies right now. And the fastest implementations were with organizations who did not care how the system works. So that, it's funny to say, right? Yeah. Especially for me, for a techie. But people who approached it as a black box, very fast. Yeah. People who really wanted to understand how it works, long time.
I would just add, I mean, I agree with what you said, but how we should approach that, that's another question. So I was recently in Astana, and what the regulator is doing there, they are providing the sandbox to the suppliers to install the solution to the sandbox, and then everyone that has a problem with that can come to the sandbox and see how it works. And this is the education part, where they see the actual, you know, the actual deployment, and then they can say, oh, but I have a problem with data privacy, I have a problem with performance, whatever. And you can do the same within the company or across companies, where everyone can, you know, look at what you deployed and say, this is what I see as a potential problem, but then how do we solve that? Whether this is a legal issue or whatever issue is, this is how you can educate them. But I also agree, I would like to join this and emphasize, we shouldn't be you know, introducing blockchain because it's a hype, just because it's a blockchain. We should have a problem that we are not able to solve otherwise, or it would be much more difficult to solve it otherwise. And that then we introduce the blockchain, and then we talk about all those potential issues.
Thank you. Maybe one final question? We are already out of time, but I didn't see if there was someone else actually wanted to. Okay. If not, then I'd like to thank all my panelists for the very interesting discussions we had. Some footsteps away from the champagne and the party later on, so enjoy the rest of Hyperledger Forum, and we will be around and approachable for questions if you might have. Thanks, everyone.